Tonight on the Fifth Estate, Bus 1170, a night of terror that shocked the nation.
Ever since that night, I have nightmares.
37 passengers and one man on a mission from God.
Looking at a crazy man in sunglasses with an unsheathed knife staring right at you. So I was like, oh great, I'm gonna die.
Badger appears to be 6 foot tall, Asian male, short dark hair, black t-shirt, armed with a knife right now.
It appears he has 2 knives now. He's still inside the bus. Copy that. Door open or closed?
Doors closed and locked. Badger is armed with a knife and a pair of scissors, and he's defiling the body at the front of the bus as we speak.
I am the evil son of an evil god.
There we go, we are recording. So, I'm on the Greyhound bus. I'm
Greyhound too.
Look, I met up with Aaron. Yeah. There he is.
Somewhere this summer we met.
Like I said I would. I met up with him at the end of the ferry.
Update them on what else is going on here. No money.
Oh yeah, we're down. How much money do you have left?
5 or less.
Okay,
From 1,200.
From 1,200, we have a total of about $20 left. And here's another guy, got on at Abbotsford. He works the carnival too. His name's John. We know him as Crazy Eyes. If you take a look at his eyes,
call you Crazy Eyes?
You'll understand.
Oh, I don't understand.
Crazy.
Why?
I just found out some more interesting news today that I'm all ecstatic about. I'm not going to tell you yet. Wait and find out. I'll have quite the trip back to Winnipeg.
Hello, I'm Bob McEwen. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. It took place right about here, along this stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway in south-central Manitoba, about 18 kilometers west of Portage-la Prairie. What happened here on July the 30th, 2008 would cost one young man his life, would profoundly change the lives of dozens of others who saw it, and would shock anyone who's heard about it since. It's the story of Bus 1170, as told by the people who lived it. As you'll see, it's a story in which seemingly unimportant and minor decisions and quirks of fate would turn out to be the difference between life and death. It is not a story for young children or the faint of heart. To truly understand the terrible events on that Greyhound bus, you first got to know the doomed young man named Tim Mclean. He grew up outside Winnipeg, in the little farming community of Ely, Manitoba. It's the kind of place where kids have to make their own fun. Tim's lifelong friend, Tiffany LaBelle.
What was he like then?
Didn't sit down.
Active.
Very, very active. We would probably have to sit down and he'd still keep going for about 2 hours.
Too active and too restless for school, Tim was always eager to interact with everyone around him.
He was not shy at all. Say I would bring him to a gathering or a family gathering, and he didn't know those relatives. In 2 seconds, he would know those relatives, make friends with them, and know everything about them, and he was just he loved people.
That love of new places and new people brought him here, the Western Canada Carnival Circuit, where Tiffany had got a job at the Red River Exhibition in Winnipeg.
So of course, knowing Tim would be up for anything, I called him and said, "What are you doing this summer?" He said, "Well, nothing still." I said, "Okay, pack your bag for a week." I said, "I don't know how long we're gonna be gone for." I said, "But at least pack your bag for a week."
What began as an impulse became a passion. Great talker, born pitchman. Soon, Tim Mclean ran his own Midway Games, the heart of a tight-knit, fun-loving band of carnies who partied as hard as they worked.
It's basically like a huge community that just travels together and goes from place to place, and it's like one big family. You dream about the carnival. You hear, when you try going to sleep, you still hear the noises in your head.
In a good week, Tim might make $1,000 or more. But his money often went as quickly as it came. Then it was on to the next town.
This is Carterville, BC. That's what we've come up with the name for this documentary. Seconds ago. Check it out. They got a little tiny water slide over there. I think it's marketable.
He loved being on the move, recording his view of the passing world for the folks back home in Manitoba.
Yeah, if we had a long enough layover, but we only get 10 minutes here, which kind of sucks.
In his late teens, Tim had moved from Winnipeg to live with his father, Tim Sr., and his stepmother, Nadine.
And did he have aspirations? Did he have a goal? Did he have a dream?
To travel.
Just to travel.
That's what he loved doing. He loved traveling, and
he wanted to be famous. He said he'd be famous.
He told us that one day he would be famous.
Yep. Never actually said what he was going to do, but he did say one day everybody will know who I am.
For the time being, Tim's life was anonymous and on the road. His preferred mode of transportation, the Greyhound bus. Cheap and cheerful, like the carnival crowd. But by 22, the footloose Tim Mclean finally had a plan. He'd found the place he wanted to put down roots, British Columbia.
I think we're going that way. Well, I'm on the Nanaimo ferry, getting ready to leave the island. So, yeah, I gotta talk close to this thing so it can hear me. Basically, I'm just walking around the ferry. Car's getting loaded. I'm definitely gonna have to come back here someday, soon.
He had no idea then what his future would bring. It was the end of July 2008, and Tim was working the Klondike Days exhibition in Edmonton. The carnival's next stop was Regina. And that's when Tim Mclean made a crucial decision. Instead of going to Regina, he'd go home to Winnipeg to make arrangements for his move to BC. Unknowingly, he would set into motion a fateful chain of events, because when friends offered to buy him a plane ticket from Edmonton to Winnipeg, he declined. He told them he'd rather take the Greyhound bus. At the bus depot in Edmonton, just after midnight on July 30th, Bus 1170 pulled out to begin its 24-hour journey east, taking Tim Mclean home. But he would never get there. After the break, the final trip of Bus 1170, the night no one aboard will ever forget.
I felt just my stomach turning, and I just knew that there was something about this guy. When I saw him, I just knew.
So it's, I don't know what, 8:45? So it's about 5 to 9 in the morning, on Wednesday morning.
22-year-old Tim Mclean was starting a week off from the Western Canada Carnival circuit, traveling home from Edmonton to Winnipeg on Greyhound Bus 1170. He was looking forward to seeing family and friends and planning his move to British Columbia. No one could have known it, but Tim's future was now in the hands of someone he hadn't yet met, a man named Vincent Li. As you'll see, Li was about as different from Tim Mclean as someone could be. Their meeting, an accident of fate that would profoundly change both of their lives. And no one knows Vincent Li better than Dr. Stanley Yaren.
In this case, it's a horrendous but random, unfortunate set of events. You know, not a whole lot different than being struck by lightning for Mr. Mclean, for Tim Mclean. It just happened to be in that place and that time. And I see it the same way for Mr. Li.
Manitoba's chief forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Yaren, conducted a series of interviews with Vincent Li, which were then transcribed. The dramatizations you'll see tonight are taken directly from those conversations. Actors play both Yaren and Li.
You came to Canada in 2001?
With my wife. We live in Winnipeg. I joined a church there. I was baptized and became a Christian. My wife and I disagree about many things. We argue all the time, and we separated.
Though Vincent Li was well educated with a Chinese degree in computer science, in Canada he had a series of low-paying jobs, most recently delivering newspapers in Edmonton. And his new life became even more of a struggle when in 2005 he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition he left untreated. Dr. Stanley Yaren.
People described him as not being able to participate in normal social conversations. He would blurt out things that seemed to be irrelevant to the conversation, or his mood seemed to be out of context to the conversation.
Vincent Li told Dr. Yaren that he heard a voice in his head he believed was God, warning him about evil people, ordering him what to do. So, with a few bags and his laptop computer, he boarded the Greyhound bus at the depot in Edmonton. The same route Tim Mclean would travel 24 hours later. Li also carried a hunting knife he had recently purchased.
I got the knife at Canadian Tire. God told me my life was in danger and that people will try to kill me.
On the bus, Vincent Li sat quietly. His plan was to go all the way through to Winnipeg. If he had done that, he and Tim Mclean would never have met. But it wasn't to be. A bus from Edmonton takes about 18 hours to get here to Erickson, Manitoba. Stops here only ever long enough for a couple of people to get on or off. When Vincent Li's bus arrived on July the 29th, he had a ticket to Winnipeg and then on to Thunder Bay. But when he arrived here in Erickson, for some reason, he decided to stay.
God told me to stay in Erickson. I waited on a bench. A pickup truck drove slowly past me. I took out my knife. I didn't know if he was sent to kill me.
Erickson is a small town where visitors tend to stand out. 15-year-old Darren Beatty was pumping gas the day Vincent Li arrived and sat on the bench outside the Co-op grocery store, staring into space.
Just average guy dressed, just pants and shirt and neat hair and everything. He didn't dress up too fancy, so.
And sunglasses.
Yeah, and sunglasses.
And the next morning, Li was still on the bench. A note on his laptop said, "For sale, $600.
I looked at him, looked at the laptop, and I was gonna go, but he kind of got up and said, "Do I want to buy it?" And I said, "Well, I don't have that much money." And then he said, I said, $60. And then he said, "Okay." And then I shook his hand on it, and then he wanted more money for the bag, and I said that was okay, I'd just take the laptop.
It was his only interaction with anyone in Erickson. Unsure whether the voice wanted him to stay or go, Li made a crucial decision of his own, boarding the next bus through town, Greyhound 1170. When he got on at Erickson, Li took a seat at the front, again sitting quietly, staring into space. By now, the passengers from Edmonton had been traveling for almost 18 hours. They were tired and bored, or asleep like Tim Mclean, seated in the second last row. Kaylee Shaw was located midway between Mclean and Vincent Li. She says at first, there was nothing out of the ordinary.
The bus trip was very long, tiring, plus really hot with so many people on the bus. I listened to my MP3 player just to try and pass the time.
Stephen Allison and his wife were on their way from the Northwest Territories to Winnipeg to start college. They'd often used the Greyhound to travel the north without incident, until now.
Like from Edmonton, I'd had a bad feeling. I could feel that something was going to happen, I just didn't know what.
After a meal break in Brandon, for some reason, Vincent Li decided to change seats. He started walking slowly towards the rear.
He looked at every single person as he walked down before sitting down at the final spot that he did.
Li stopped right at Stephen Allison's row. He sat down next to Tim McLean.
I felt just my stomach turning, and I just knew that there was something about this guy. When I saw him, I just knew.
So the seat that he chose, why did he tell you he sat there?
He said to me that it was simply because Tim gave him a friendly acknowledgement as he walked by the seat. Something like, "Hi, how are you doing?" Something of that nature.
Then Tim McLean fell back to sleep, but Stephen Allison couldn't keep his mind off Vincent Li.
He was acting really, really odd the whole time. He had with him a 2-liter bottle of Cool Nest tea and a roll of toilet paper that he would not let go of, either of them. And then when he wanted a drink, he'd sit there and put the roll of toilet paper under his chin and open it and then take it back off.
Was he saying anything?
At one point he was. Closer to when it happened, he was sitting there rocking back and forth chanting something, but it wasn't in English, so I didn't know what he said. But that was really, really weird. That was when I was like, okay, something's going down, something's gonna happen. But my second thought was, if I get up, go and start saying something, he might say, oh great, someone's found me out, and then look over and see my wife sitting next to me and decide to go after her instead.
Outside, on that stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway, it was getting dark. Inside, the movie on the video system was The Mask of Zorro.
There were no lights on, just a TV that was going with the video. And we had our choice, to sleep or just watch the movie.
But at the back of the bus, Vincent Li was now fixated on his seatmate, Tim McLean.
God told me to kill him.
When we return, Vincent Li hears the voice one more time.
He kneeled down over Tim McLean's body, and that's when we had started to watch him behead him.
It was the evening of July 30th, 2008, as Greyhound Bus 1170 rolled east through Manitoba along the Trans-Canada Highway. The video system showing the movie Mask of Zorro. In the second row from the back, right-hand side, window seat, was 22-year-old Tim McLean on his way home to Winnipeg. Next to him was 40-year-old Vincent Li, a recent Canadian citizen. It wasn't apparent yet, but he suffered from schizophrenia, a voice in his head telling him what to do. And across the aisle from Li was college student Stephen Allison, convinced something terrible was about to happen. And then it did.
I saw him take out the knife. I guess that had been the point when he had snapped and just gone crazy. Looking at a crazy man in sunglasses with an unsheathed knife staring right at you. So I was like, oh great, I'm gonna die.
Stephen Allison watched in horror as Vincent Li turned to his right and started to stab Tim McLean.
I was yelling at the top of my lungs, stop the bus, someone's getting stabbed. So pretty sure half the people heard me, and the ones that didn't heard the commotion that came up seconds later.
Allison says for him, the priority had to be getting everyone else away from Vincent Li.
The minute he turned, I stood up and ran down the aisle.
Haley Shaw was seated in the middle of the bus when Stephen Allison rushed by.
He ran along the aisle, yelling, pull over, get out of the bus as fast as you can. So we ended up shoving each other into the aisle, trying to get out as fast as we could.
And behind her, there were the horrifying sounds of Li's attack on Tim McLean.
I was able to hear Tim McLean scream. It still haunts me to this day, the scream, and seeing what was going on.
As the others frantically pushed past, Stephen Allison saw 3 people trapped behind Li at the back of the bus. A mother, her young son, and his wife.
And When you got back to your wife, what was going on across the aisle?
Well, at that point, Tim had tried to jump over Vince Li and landed in the aisle. And so right there in the aisle beside her.
And Vincent Li was still stabbing?
Yeah, it was on top of Tim, continually stabbing him. It had been about 50 or 60 times by that point. So there was no hope of anything. Like, it's very, very sad, but there was nothing anyone could have done.
Allison helped his wife and the others to escape by climbing back over the seats. He says it was chaos.
Everyone is freaking out. People were crying, people were sick.
Truck driver Chris Alguire was also on the Trans-Canada that night, heading home, when he saw the Greyhound pulled over on the shoulder.
People were on the south side, on the shoulder, and they were fleeing to the back of the bus and away from the bus. And they definitely had a look of terror, of fright on their face.
One of the passengers called out to him for help.
Do you remember the exact words she said?
Somebody's being stabbed to death on the bus.
So Chris Alguire grabbed a heavy metal bar from the back of his truck. He and another man boarded the bus to confront Vincent Li.
Did he say anything?
Nothing.
What did you see when you looked at him?
So before it was empty.
Expressionless?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good word for it. Expressionless.
It would be hard to imagine anything worse than the sight of Vincent Li next to the young man he'd so savagely killed, until what happened next.
And then during this time, Vincent Li, then he kneeled down over Tim McLean's body, and that's when we had started to watch him behead him.
What was going through your mind at that point?
I'd never wanted to hurt somebody so severely in my life until that point. And that still hasn't changed.
Then, Vincent Li started up the aisle towards him.
Yes, with head in one hand and knife in the other, and made his way towards me.
Armed only with that metal bar, Alguire and the other man backed out of the bus and barricaded the door.
It's a tough decision. The hardest decision there was that there's women and children and other men who are counting on me, I suppose, to not let this guy get away. And if I was thinking about myself ahead of them, I would have tried to take him out, to disable him.
What did he do?
He walked up to the door, slowly, and he gave me a very good picture of Tim McLean and the knife that he used.
Outside, the terrified passengers could see everything happening inside.
I remember seeing him walking up and down the aisle with the head, like it was a prize. Walking in front of the window, the main window where the bus driver, the front window, walking back and forth with the head, not knowing, like, as if it was a prize. I'm like, what is he doing? Why is this happening?
I don't know if I did the right thing. God commanded me, but it was my own hands. So I must die. God told me to put the body as far away as possible, or it would come back to life and kill me.
Once having stabbed him repeatedly, his instructions were, and the voice that he received told him that, you must dismember the body. And he was frantic and fearful that he had to do what he was being instructed to do in order to prevent this evil force from re-emerging and continuing to, proceeding to kill him.
By now, there was a number of RCMP officers on the scene, but they made no attempt to board the bus or to stop Vincent Li from defiling Tim Mclean's remains. They did provide a running radio commentary of what Li was doing. They called him Badger.
Badger appears to be a 6-foot-tall Asian male with short dark hair, black t-shirt, armed with a knife right now. Badger is armed with a knife and a pair of scissors, and he's defiling the body at the front of the bus as we speak. Zulu Delta 1 at your leisure, could you give me a shout? Delta 1, Zulu. Okay, Badger's at the back of the bus, hacking off pieces and eating it.
Evidently, the Mounties' strategy was simply to wait him out. For more than 4 hours, they kept their distance and watched as Li continued to cannibalize the body of Tim Mclean.
Did they explain that to you? Did they rationalize it?
No, because maybe perhaps I was a little bit irrational wanting them to take him down.
Yeah.
But I did ask one of those SWAT members, I tapped on his shoulder, who was holding a fully automatic or semi-automatic M16 of sort, to shoot him.
And Chris Alguar maintains there must have been some non-lethal way to stop him.
I'm pretty sure our SWAT teams have tear gas, things to take out windows, and to fill this place up with tear gas or some sort of a gas to knock him out. And they could have, I'm sure they could have pumped enough in there to ensure him being knocked out. It would have stopped a lot, I'm sure of it. And now, you know, it's the poor Mclean family is having to deal with all of this, and that's got to be hard on them.
Yeah.
That's just crazy.
It was only hours later, when Vincent Li tried to jump out a window at the back of the bus, that he was overpowered by the RCMP, and the siege finally came to an end. That morning, forensic units found parts of Tim Mclean's body scattered all over the bus. It was a headline story in Canada, the US, and around the world. But the identity of the victim would remain a mystery, at least officially, for the next 24 hours. Like everyone else, Carol Dedeli, Tim Mclean's mother, heard it first the next day on the news. Then, as usual, she cooked Thursday dinner at the local seniors' home.
I do recall around lunchtime feeling in my stomach, and then I immediately dismissed it, believing that Timothy was already in Winnipeg. At dinner time, I cooked roast pork for the seniors. They all had dinner together, and the news was on because, I mean, this was big news. Everybody was watching it. Now, prior to the meal, when grace was said, we all put out a special prayer to the family of this young man. And I remember commenting to these senior citizens that, wow, that could have been my son. He came on that same bus, like that time frame, that scheduled bus, but he came 2 days ago.
Tim Mclean Sr. expected his son for dinner that night. After work, he picked up young Tim's favorite meal, a bucket of fried chicken. When he got home, Tim's friends were there.
Tim's friends had asked me if I had heard what happened. And I said, no. Heard what happened about what? And they said, about Tim. I said, no, so they took me inside, sat me down in front of the computer, turned the computer on, and it was right there on the front page. And her life has been upside down ever since.
At about 7:30, my ex-husband called to say that it was Tim that was on the bus. And it hadn't been confirmed yet, positively confirmed yet, but that was the belief. And I remember screaming at him not to say that. Don't say that, don't say that. And I ran out the door because I really thought I was going to throw up all over the place. And I opened the front door and I just screamed no. Just screamed no. I couldn't believe it. It was too horrific. It was too horrific. My mind wouldn't wrap around it, wouldn't accept it.
When we come back, inside the mind of Vincent Li.
He expected to be executed. He expected that would be the outcome of his involvement in this.
Tim Mclean was buried near his family and friends in Winnipeg. He would have been 24 years old this year. For his dad, Tim Sr., and stepmother Nadine, the shock and horror of what happened that awful night have evolved into an endless grief.
I don't think those are images that you could ever get out of your head. I know we can't, you know. We don't sleep at night unless we have a sleeping aid. So it's difficult. Do you think about the things that happened to him? We try not to.
We try not to. Somebody has to be held accountable. Or there will never be any closure in this.
Tim's mother, Carol Dedeli, has no doubt where some of the responsibility lies, with the RCMP officers who rushed to the scene, then waited and watched.
I understand that they have a preservation of life policy, and clearly my son's life was not able to be preserved. It was already gone. But how do you sit and watch what he's doing? This individual ate my child's eyes, a third of his heart, and they allowed that to continue. And I'm supposed to be okay with that? I'm not okay with that. Having lost him the way I lost him was horrific enough, but knowing that nobody even tried.
Since the terrible events on the Trans-Canada Highway, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have said little about their tactics that night, especially the decision to allow Vincent Li to remain on the bus for hours, abusing Tim Mclean's dead body. And the Mounties have also declined our request for an interview, saying because they've been named in the civil lawsuit filed by the Mclean family, it's now inappropriate to say anything but the murder of Tim Mclean. The family's legal action also blames the Greyhound Company and Transport Canada for the lax security that allowed a passenger to board bus 1170 with a lethal weapon. But in Manitoba, many had already made up their minds about the blame.
Dissecting issues with surgical precision. This is Charles Adler on the Chorus Radio Network. We're taking your calls.
Winnipeg-based Charles Adler is one of Canada's top talk radio hosts. He says public opinion has no doubt about the role of Vincent Li.
It was virtually unanimous, Bob, that the idea that he's not criminally responsible is absurd. The idea that he was in a psychotic state of mind for days. I mean, he bought the knife, he did what he did, he defiled the body. This took place over a long period of time. He wanted to drive away the bus. So nobody bought into the idea that Vince Li at no time during that period had any idea of what he was doing. So they weren't buying that.
Exactly 1 week after he killed Tim Mclean, Li was brought here to the psychiatric ward of the Health Sciences Centre in Winnipeg for his mental state to be assessed by Manitoba's chief forensic psychiatrist, Stanley Yaren. All the dramatizations you've seen are based on the transcripts of those meetings, the words spoken by the actors taken directly from their conversations. As the visits continued and drug treatments tempered his schizophrenia, Li began to tell his story to Dr. Yaren.
I am the evil son of an evil God. God chose me as the killer and chose Tim Mclean as the victim.
Why?
I don't know. God controls all people for his own reasons.
Would he have understood, do you think, the issue there, the main issue, and that is that if he wasn't consumed with these irrational thoughts and commands in his head, that he could be found criminally responsible for Tim Mclean's death?
Oh yes, and in fact, in the early part of the assessment, that was his entire belief, that he was responsible for the death because, as he would put it, these hands did it.
Rather than avoid responsibility, Dr. Yaren says Li was angry when told there is no death penalty in Canada.
He asked me on several occasions in the earlier interviews whether we would be able to plan his execution or whether we would execute him. He expected to be executed. He expected that would be the outcome of his involvement in this.
Do you understand that you have been charged with murder?
Yes. I have taken a life. God said I must die. God said I must kill myself.
After 19 visits, Stanley Yaren prepared his assessment of Vincent Li for the court. At stake, whether he would be found fit to stand trial or not criminally responsible for the murder of Tim Mclean.
When there is a case such as this one, which is so prominent publicly for all of these terrible reasons, does it weigh on you that there will be a public response to what you do, that there's a family looking for accountability?
Yeah, certainly it does, and I'm very much could not help but be aware of those issues. We, in general, would much rather perceive people who have done monstrous things as monsters. It's easier for us to do that. It's easiest for us to perceive people who do these horrendous things as monsters because that distances ourselves from what's happened and from what they've gone through. This was an individual who, if you put yourself in his mind and what his reality was, behaved appropriately according to what his beliefs were at the time. He believed he had to defend himself against a brutal attack and that it was kill or be killed.
In the end, the decision of the court was effectively unanimous. Everyone, from the psychiatrists who testified about Vincent Li's mental disorder to the prosecution, the defense, and the judge, were in agreement. Despite his plea to be killed, Li could not be held criminally responsible for the murder of Tim Mclean and should be sent not to prison, but a psychiatric hospital. The verdict might not have been unexpected, but that didn't make it easier for Tim Mclean's family.
He should be held responsible for it. He still did it. Whether he was in his right frame of mind or not, he still did the act. There was nobody else on that bus holding a knife, slicing up my child.
Under the law, Vincent Li will be housed in a psychiatric facility, given therapy and drugs to treat his schizophrenia. Once a year, his condition and detention will be reviewed. In theory, he could be released as early as next year. If he is released, he will have no criminal record. Meanwhile, the tragedy on Bus 1170 is still taking its toll. Stephen Allison was an honor student. Now he says he's barely able to get through a class.
I'm a very friendly, outgoing person, and this past year, I barely went out, barely talked to anyone. Like, I can talk to almost anyone, but now it's a lot harder to sit there and actually start having a conversation with someone I don't know because that paranoia sets in and you just get that feeling of what if, it's going to be another crazy person.
Kaylee Shaw still suffers from flashbacks and nightmares.
My nightmares basically consist of me still standing on the road, staring at Mr. Li with Tim's head, that he's showing it off to me and showing it off to everyone else.
Truck driver Chris Alguire stopped to help and confronted Vincent Li. Like the Greyhound driver, he hasn't been able to resume his former job or life.
He's destroyed my life in this last year. My whole world has crashed down on me. Always that feeling where you got to watch over your shoulder, somebody watching for you or somebody mad that. So I don't like to be in large groups of people anymore. So even my employment, I had to switch my employment so that I didn't have to deal with all of that.
Last summer, those who knew and loved Tim Mclean gathered to remember him, trying to make some sense of how random and ruthless life can be by keeping alive his memory. Tim's mother, Carol.
When you think of Tim these days, away from, if at all possible, away from
I just
all
miss
of this?
him. I just miss him so much. I miss the young man that he was becoming.
I do have to say, the hardest thing that I have ever had to do was to try and explain to my husband that he can't say goodbye, that there wasn't anything for him to hold on to. There wasn't a hand to hold on to. There wasn't a face to look at. And all he wanted to do was say goodbye to his son. And I had talked to the medical examiner who I had known previous and asked her straight out, is there any way that he could hold a hand, see his face, touch a foot? And my answer was no. And I knew that there wasn't much of Timothy for him to hold on to. So, did we get to say goodbye?